Today's notes are going to consist of population dynamics. And so when we're talking about population dynamics, we're really referring to how a population is going to increase and decrease. And so if we're observing populations, there are certain characteristics of that population that we can use to describe them. Okay, and remember, a population is a group of individuals all living together in one particular area. And so usually if we're looking at a population, we're looking at the size of the population. We're also looking at the density, and if you don't know what that means, we're going to define that a little bit later. We're looking at the growth rate. How quickly or how slowly are those populations growing? And then also the dispersion. Okay, something else we're going to talk about later. So, first, okay, we already know what size is, so I'm not going to address that right now. Okay, our first one that we will address is going to be density. Okay, so when we're talking about density, okay, population density, this is the number of individuals in an area. Okay, so this is a little bit different from size because when we're talking about size, we're talking about is it a large population or a small population? Density is giving us exact numbers. And so with density, we have a couple of things that can control this. So these are two vocab words you do need to be familiar with. So we have density independent factors and then density dependent factors. So density independent factors are caused by abiotic events. Where the number of people doesn't matter. Okay, so for example, okay, a tornado. Tornado does not care if it hits a city or if it hits a farm town. Fires, floods, okay, things like that. So it doesn't matter if it's a city or if it's a town or if it's a small little village. You know, these things can happen anywhere. They are abiotic events. Doesn't matter about the number of people. So the opposite of that is going to be a density dependent factor. Okay, so a density dependent factor, these are caused by events in highly populated areas. Okay. So, for example, during flu season, when people are in school, the flu spreads really fast because there's a lot of people here. Same thing with colds, okay, the chicken pox, things like that. Okay, so when you have more people around, then more of these things can spread. All right, so next on our list is growth rate. So growth rate, we're probably going to go on both pages just because there's a lot to write about growth rate. And so growth rate is describing the increase and decrease of the population. So, for example, if we want to increase the population, okay, so population increase, okay, so we're increasing our population. We have a couple things we can look at. We can look at natalities. Okay, so natalities, what that means is number of births. And then we can also look at immigration. Okay, so immigration is moving in. So on the opposite of that, we also have population decrease. Okay, so opposite of natalities, okay, we know is fatalities or mortalities. Okay, and then the opposite of immigration is emigration. Okay, so I think of emigration as exiting. Okay, so those are two ways to increase and decrease our population. So we do have some graphs that go along with this. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to my next page so that way I can show you those graphs. All right, so with my graphs to describe this, I can have two types of growth. I can have an exponential growth, or a logistic growth. Okay, so what does that mean? So if I draw a little graph here, okay, for both of them. So my exponential growth is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, so I'm gonna have a line coming, maybe I might have a steady population, and it's all of a sudden gonna shoot up. Okay, that's an exponential growth. Logistic growth, it's going to be steady, and then I have an increase, and then it's going to be steady again. Okay, so that's my logistic growth. So exponential growth, I can see the population is just continually growing. For my logistic growth, I have a cap right here. Okay, and that cap is called the carrying capacity. So let's talk about some details about these graphs. I'm going to start with exponential growth. For exponential growth, this is also known as a J-curve. Okay, I think you can see why. Growth is very fast. Okay, so your population increases fast. With an exponential growth, you have unlimited resources. Okay, there's no competition for shelter, food, water, things like that. So some examples of populations that grow at exponential growth are bacteria, cancer cells, and actually us. Okay, we are currently growing at an exponential rate. So for logistic growth, this is known as an S-curve. You have a short period of rapid growth, and your resources are limited. Lastly, the last thing we're going to talk about is dispersion. Okay, and this one's really easy. So with population dispersion, this is the spacing of our individuals. So let's imagine I have these three little areas. So I have 3 common ways that organisms can be dispersed. So I can have organisms that are all together like this. Okay, and we call that one clumped. Okay, so for example, a school of fish. Okay, so where they're all clumped together. We have some where they're equally spaced, and we call that one uniform. Okay, so penguins like to be uniformly spaced. They don't like to be too close together or too far. And then the last one, okay, just completely random. Okay, so an example of this one would be weeds in the yard. Okay, so weeds grow wherever they want to. So these are our different characteristics of a population. We're going to be working on this throughout the week, and you will have a lab over this. Let me know if you have any questions.